Shirley Jones, America's beloved matriarch from the Partridge Family, has carried a quiet pain for decades. To the world, she was calm, composed, full of grace. But behind the scenes, she was watching David Cassidy fall apart. He was more than just her stepson. He was a boy she tried to save over and over, and what she's just revealed is that no one listened. Not the studio, not the family, not even David himself. At 90, Shirley has finally broken the silence, and what she shared left even lifelong fans in tears. When Shirley Jones first stepped into David Cassidy's life, she had no idea how deep the connection would become, or how much it would one day hurt her. He wasn't her biological son. He was Jack Cassidy's child from a previous marriage. But the moment he walked into her home, all lanky limbs and teenage swagger, Shirley saw something that made her pause. He had his father's charm, that same spark that drew her to Jack in the first place. But there was something else too, a vulnerability, a longing to be seen, to be accepted. Shirley, with her own son still young and a heart that had always leaned toward caretaking, didn't hesitate. She welcomed David into the fold, not as a stepson, but as one of her own. It wasn't always easy. Jack Cassidy, as magnetic as he was, cast a long and complicated shadow over both their lives. His struggles with alcohol, his outbursts, his own fragile ego, those things didn't stay confined to adult relationships. They bled into the way David saw himself, and the way he tried to define manhood. Shirley saw it all. She saw how David struggled to be heard, especially in a house filled with showbiz personalities. She watched as he worked harder and harder to be perfect, on stage, on set, in interviews. It wasn't just ambition. It was a need to prove something to someone. Then came the Partridge Family, a television phenomenon, a cultural juggernaut, and a decision that would forever bind Shirley and David in the public's imagination. Playing mother and son on screen was, at first, a joy. Their chemistry was effortless, their banter sweet, their harmonies pitch-perfect. America fell in love with them, and for a moment everything seemed like it might actually work. But behind the scenes, Shirley began to notice cracks. David wasn't just playing the role of teen heartthrob, he was being devoured by it. The screaming fans, the obsessive media attention, the endless expectations. It was too much for a young man still figuring out who he was. Shirley tried to be there. She tried to offer the steady hand, the listening ear, the quiet reassurance that this, too, would pass. But the more famous he became, the more alone he seemed to feel. He began pulling away, not just from her, but from everyone. She didn't want to push. She didn't want to lecture. But she watched with growing unease as David began to lean on substances to cope. Pills, alcohol, anything to numb the pressure. And all the while, fans kept cheering. The machine kept moving. Shirley brought it up once, gently. He brushed it off, charming as always. Told her not to worry. Said he had it all under control. But she knew better. Mothers always do. There's a particular kind of heartbreak that comes from watching someone you love self-destruct in slow motion. It's not a sudden blow. It's a quiet erosion. One missed call at a time. One broken promise. One tabloid headline that confirms your worst fears. And Shirley bore it all with grace. Never a public complaint. Never a cruel remark. Just patience, hope, and an ache that never quite went away. Because deep down, she believed she could help him. That if she just said the right thing or waited long enough, he'd come back. But he didn't. Not fully. Not really. And now, at 90, Shirley is finally admitting what she kept buried for decades. That no matter how much love you give, sometimes, it's not enough to save someone. David Cassidy's rise to stardom was nothing short of meteoric. Practically overnight. He went from a charming, slightly shy young man to the face plastered across every teen magazine in America. Girls screamed at concerts. Record sales exploded. Television ratings soared. And yet, behind the glitter and fanfare, David was shrinking under the weight of it all. Shirley Jones saw it from a distance at first, then up close. He had always been sensitive, more so than people realized. The kind of sensitivity that could make someone an artist, or break them. And as the spotlight grew hotter, David's ability to cope began to fray. It wasn't just the fame. It was the expectations. He wasn't allowed to be tired, or angry, or confused. He had to smile. He had to sing. He had to be perfect. Every day. And for a while, he played the part beautifully. But Shirley knew he was just barely holding it together. When he was with her, offset, away from cameras, he would sometimes let the mask slip. She'd see the weariness in his eyes, the restlessness, the frustration with being seen as a product instead of a person. He wasn't just David anymore. He was David Cassidy, a brand, pin-up, a business. He felt trapped, and Shirley knew it. She tried to intervene subtly. She spoke to producers, asking for lighter schedules. She tried to coax David into taking breaks, into finding hobbies that grounded him. She even suggested therapy once, but back then, the idea was quickly dismissed, especially by someone trying to maintain a tough, composed image in a ruthless industry. What haunted Shirley most was that she could see where it was going, and she still couldn't stop it. David began numbing the pressure in the most common way celebrities do, with substances that promised relief. At first, it was occasional, then habitual, then visible, and still the machine around him kept moving. There was always another album to cut, another tour to begin, another interview to smile through. Shirley often felt like the only one trying to press pause, but her voice, gentle and maternal, was no match for the roar of the crowd or the demands of show business. She'd invite David over for dinner, try to create a sense of normalcy, a place where he could just be himself. And sometimes he'd come. They'd sit, eat quietly, talk about family. She treasured those moments. But even then, she could tell he wasn't fully present. His mind was racing elsewhere. She once caught him staring into space after dessert, his plate untouched. When she softly asked what was wrong, he smiled and said, "Nothing, just tired." But she could tell it was more than that. It always was. Over time, David's appearances at family events grew more erratic. He was either the life of the party or nowhere to be found. There was no middle ground anymore. And for Shirley, each absence was a small heartbreak. Still, she refused to give up. She kept reaching out, kept leaving the door open, kept believing that he'd find his way back. But the pressure never let up, and neither did the addiction. Fans never saw the quiet unraveling behind the curtain. They saw the smile, the charm, the voice. Shirley saw the toll. And as the years went on, she started to realize a devastating truth. David didn't just need help. He didn't want it. Not yet. It's one of the hardest things for a parent figure to accept, that love alone can't heal someone who hasn't chosen to heal themselves. But Shirley never stopped trying. She just started preparing her heart for the possibility that trying might not be enough. As the spotlight on David Cassidy began to dim, the reality behind the curtain became harder to ignore. What had once been whispers turned into headlines. Arrests, rehab stints, public outbursts, and through it all, Shirley Jones said nothing. Not out of indifference, not because she didn't care, but because, in her heart, she believed protecting David's dignity mattered more than defending her own heartbreak. She watched as the tabloids picked apart his every misstep, his struggles with alcohol, his financial troubles, his erratic behavior. It was like watching someone drown, slowly, while the world stood by and commented on the splashing. And Shirley, she kept her distance, not because she didn't want to be close, but because David had made it clear he didn't want help. Not from her, not from anyone. There were moments when he'd call, brief conversations, surface level at best. She'd ask how he was. He'd say he was fine, and Shirley, always gentle, never pushed. But when she hung up, she'd sit in silence, knowing it wasn't fine. Not really. The hardest part wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't. The distance that had crept in between them, the unspoken things, the years of missed opportunities. Shirley had been his TV mother. She had been his stepmother. But more than that, she had been one of the few constants in his life. And still, he drifted away. Friends sometimes asked why she didn't speak out, why she didn't share her side, go public, tell people what was really going on. But Shirley never saw that as her place. She wasn't interested in sympathy or attention. She didn't want to turn his pain into a spectacle. She just wanted him to be okay. But by the late 2000s, it was clear that David's demons were still very present. A series of DUIs, bankruptcy. He looked tired, older than his years, and Shirley's heart broke every time she saw his face in the news. There's a specific kind of helplessness that only comes with loving an addict, especially one who once had the world at his feet. She remembered the boy who had once danced around the living room, guitar in hand, trying to impress her with a new song. She remembered the teenager who had called her Shirl with affection, the young man who had cried in her kitchen once, years ago, after a fight with Jack, and told her he wished things were different. But now, there was only silence. Shirley kept a photo of David on her mantle, not from his celebrity days, but from a quiet Christmas at home, before the Partridge Family, before the hysteria, before the unraveling. He looked peaceful in that photo, happy, grounded. She'd sometimes catch herself looking at it and wondering if there was ever a moment, just one, where she could have changed it all, said something different, done something more. But that kind of thinking, she knew, could eat you alive. Still, she couldn't help but carry it. When David's health began to seriously decline, she knew it was time. Time to face what she'd been dreading for decades. The ending no one wanted but had always felt possible. She didn't make a scene. She didn't alert the press. She just sat quietly, holding the grief that had lived in her heart for years. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't shocking. But it still shattered her. Because in the end, Shirley Jones hadn't just lost a stepson. She'd lost the boy she once thought she could save. When news broke that David Cassidy had passed away in 2017, fans around the world mourned the teen idol they had adored for decades. But for Shirley Jones, the grief was something else entirely. It wasn't just about loss, it was about everything unsaid. She didn't rush to issue a public statement. There were no press conferences, no interviews, just a quiet, dignified presence at a private memorial. And behind that silence was the weight of a truth she had carried for years. Because what few people knew was that Shirley had been warned. A doctor, someone close to David's care, had confided in her not long before the end. He doesn't have much time. The liver failure had progressed rapidly. The damage, irreversible. Shirley listened, nodded, and said nothing. Not to the public, not to the press. She knew David would want privacy. Even if they'd grown apart, even if he hadn't returned her calls in months, she still felt it was her responsibility to protect him, to be the shield he no longer had the strength to hold up himself. But she made a quiet decision that very day. She would go see him, one last time, not to lecture, not to cry, but simply to be there. When she arrived, he was resting, frail, smaller than she remembered. The once electric presence was now still, calm, almost childlike. She sat beside him, unsure if he even knew she was there, but she held his hand anyway. She didn't say much, just little things, memories, moments. The time he tried to surprise her with a homemade dinner. The way he once carried her youngest son on his shoulders after school. The way he used to hum to himself in the back of the tour bus. He didn't speak, but Shirley swore. He squeezed her hand, just once. And in that moment, she made peace with what she'd always feared. That no matter how much you love someone, you can't write their ending for them. You can only be there when the final page turns. After David's death, tributes poured in. Former co-stars, musicians, fans, they all had something to say. Shirley didn't interrupt. She let others share their memories. She knew her relationship with David had been different, complicated, private. But there was one thing she needed to do. One truth she had never spoken publicly. A few weeks later, in a quiet moment during a charity event, a reporter gently asked her, "What do you remember most about David?" She paused, not because she didn't know, but because what she was about to say had been buried for so long. "I remember that I always believed he could turn things around," she said softly. "I never stopped believing that." It was the closest she had ever come to admitting how much it hurt. Because belief is a powerful thing. And when someone you love falls, and keeps falling, that belief becomes a lifeline. You cling to it. You convince yourself that one day they'll grab hold. And sometimes they don't. That was the secret Shirley had carried all those years. That despite the public image of strength, she had felt helpless. That despite her endless love, she couldn't save him. And that knowing she couldn't had haunted her. Even now, at 90, the pain lingers. But so does the love. She doesn't speak about David often. But when she does, her voice softens. Her eyes cloud just a little. And it's clear. No matter the distance, no matter the silence, he never stopped being her boy. For years after David Cassidy's death, Shirley Jones maintained a quiet grace about their story. She declined interviews. She turned down memoir offers. Even when fans asked her directly at events, she would simply smile and say, "He was very special to me." But now, at 90, something in her has shifted. Perhaps it's age, or the desire to leave nothing unsaid. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the weight of all the almost finally catching up to her. Almost saved him, almost reached him, almost changed the ending. And so, for the first time, Shirley has begun to speak more candidly. Not to expose, not to shame, but to share. To show fans that behind the fame, behind the music and the laughter, there was a real boy. One who struggled, one who hurt, one who tried, and one who was deeply, deeply loved. She said, without bitterness, that the industry failed David in many ways, that the pressures placed on him as a young man were too great, too sudden, and too isolating. And she's also admitted what might be her most painful truth of all, that she failed him too, not through neglect, but through hope. She hoped so much, believed so hard, that he would pull through, that he would figure it out, that she didn't push harder, that she didn't force the conversation when it mattered most. It's a grief that lives in the if-onlys. If only she had said more. If only he had let her in. If only he had one more year, one more chance. But even through that grief, Shirley never speaks of David as a cautionary tale. She speaks of him as a boy full of light. A boy who sang with his whole heart. A boy who made millions smile, even when he couldn't find the smile himself. A boy who, in her eyes, never stopped being worth saving. And that's what fans have come to understand. That behind Shirley's silence wasn't shame, but sorrow. A sorrow so deep and so personal that it took nearly a lifetime to name. And now, with her words finally out there, something remarkable has happened. Fans have begun sharing their own regrets, their own stories of loved ones they couldn't reach, their own memories of watching the Partridge Family and feeling, in some small way, like David Cassidy was theirs too. Because Shirley's truth isn't just about David. It's about all of us. It's about the people we love who slip through our fingers. It's about the words we should have said, the hugs we should have held longer, the warning signs we ignored because we had to believe that things would turn around. And in telling her story, Shirley has done something David never quite could. She's stopped pretending. She's dropped the mask. And she's allowed the pain to speak. It hasn't been easy. Even now, she struggles to find the words sometimes. But when she does speak, there's no anger, only tenderness, and a quiet strength that says, this is what love looks like, even when it doesn't get a happy ending. At 90, Shirley Jones isn't trying to rewrite the past. She's simply making peace with it. And maybe that's the most powerful kind of love there is, the kind that stays even after the music stops, the kind that remembers, forgives, and speaks, even when the person it loves is no longer here to hear it. For so many fans, Shirley Jones will always be the warm, wise mother from the Partridge Family. But what we often forget is that real life is messier, harder, and far more painful than anything scripted for television. Behind the polished image was a woman carrying the quiet grief of watching someone she loved slip away, inch by inch. Shirley Jones didn't just play David Cassidy's mother on screen. She tried to be that presence in real life too. But as she's now shared, sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes it's patient, private, unnoticed, and sometimes it breaks your heart. At 90, Shirley has finally revealed what she kept hidden all these years. Not a scandal, not a confession, but the soft ache of regret. The truth that no one could save David if he wasn't ready. Not even her. It's the kind of story that lingers, not because it's dramatic, but because it's true. And it reminds us all, even those who seem the strongest often carry the heaviest pain. For more emotional stories, check out this video.